So I want to talk to you this morning about a sermon I've entitled Travel Guide. And I'd like you to be thinking about your own life and places in your own life where change is taking place. Maybe it's something you want to have happen. Maybe it's not something you want to have happen. You find yourself sort of out there on the road, as it were, not physically maybe, but in terms of life changes. I know a lot of us have been watching the news every night to find out what's happening to IBM down the road. And of course, there have been rumors swirling around and all kinds of questions. And that raises huge issues for people, some of whom have put 20, 30, 35 years into a single place of work. And will they be there this time next year or this time next month? Many of you, a number of you, have sent young people off to school. We had, what do we have, a dozen kids stretched across the front here, all graduating from high school. Whether they go away to school or not, it's still a whole different world. And for some of you, it's very different. It means miles and miles away. Now, some of you are expecting grandchildren or have a young person who's going to be married. The Burke's son, Jason, was married just yesterday. And again, a brand new journey, lots of changes. The grass doesn't grow under our feet here. The Lord keeps us moving along. And then for some of us, it's a matter of dealing with personal change or with physical change. Matt Luno, who we've been praying for, never in a million years thought that he would have a stroke of all things. And I think it was to you and Sue that he said that strokes are for old people. They told me I had a stroke, but I couldn't have a stroke. Strokes are for old people. And Matt isn't old, and having a stroke doesn't make him old. But it was not anything he saw in the headlights, or nor his wife. And here in the prime of life, to be now rehabbing and going through that long journey. So this is something that touches us all, but it touches us as a church when a pastor, or in this case 2 pastors, are called to something that God has put on their hearts. And so let's just take a few minutes. We're going to be in Psalm 23, which you probably know by heart. If you don't, it'll all come back to you. And I've titled this sermon Travel Guide. It's amazing how much you can get done on the internet when it comes to planning a trip. You can buy your ticket. You can reserve a rental car. You can reserve lodging. You can investigate the place or places you intend to visit. In fact, as Suzanne and I are getting ready for that trip that you so graciously blessed us with, we can take that trip just after Labor Day, I've noticed that the minute you start thinking about something, Google already knows it. And if you ever hit the thing that says rental car, then every screen you go to, boom, there are the rental cars coming up in those little advert boxes. And the same thing is true with flights. I purchased some tickets, but they're acting like I'm going to buy tickets for the rest of my life because they're still bombing me with more tickets. But you can even go to the places that you want to go to on Google Earth, and they can be halfway around the world or they can be next door, but you can grab the little orange guy and put him down on the map, and all of a sudden you're walking down the street. I mean, this is just unimaginable that you could be there without even leaving your house or even getting out of your chair. In fact, you can take 1,000 virtual journeys without ever getting out of your family room. Pick a continent, pick a country. What do you want to see? National parks? Disney World? The beach? Someplace overseas? No problem. Just Google it, and inside of 2 seconds, you can pick your view of that particular place. My son moved to South Carolina, as you probably know. We were down there for the wedding, and then Hurricane Arthur came up the coast, which didn't affect us except with a lot of wind here, but it definitely roughed up the ocean along the South Carolina and North Carolina coast. So we started going on the webcams. Well, I'm used to a webcam being a fuzzy, grainy little picture with a scratchy screen. Not along the beaches of the east coast of the United States. These are HD webcams that are movies. You're watching people walk around, you're watching the waves come in, you're watching the seagulls go by. I mean, if you had a big enough screen, you could just get your umbrella and your towel and just... But actually being on that webcam, actually being on that beach or being in that destination is something else again. It means a whole lot of change in our lives. You got to stop the mail. You got to pack your suitcase and carry on. Got to weigh your suitcase to see whether it's going to make it on the plane or as a carry-on or whatever. You don't just buy the ticket online, but it means getting up early if you live near Burlington, driving to the airport, going through security, boarding a plane. It means finding that hotel that came up when you Googled it for rooms. It means abandoning your routine in every sense of the word. About the only thing you can do that's the same as what you did at home is brush your teeth. It means being willing to go into travel mode. And if you are making a trip this summer, or perhaps you can think back to a trip that you've made, you know what that's like. You have to be willing to let go of just about everything that's familiar and get into this whole different mindset where you're ready for all kinds of change and eating in a different place perhaps every day, and maybe sleeping in a different bed every night, and meeting different people, and not worrying about whether you turned the oven off or not when you left the house. And does anybody else ever worry about that? The stove? You know, someday they'll have a button on your phone where you can just hit it and stove's off, you know. They got it. I know, they got it. I know. Now, one of the best ways to get into travel mode is to touch bases with someone who's already been to the place you're going. A good guidebook, in fact, will point you in the right direction for all sorts of things, even before you leave the house, especially if you're going to someplace far away, someplace where you haven't been before, and where you're going to have to make a lot of decisions, like what you want to see, what you don't want to see, where you're going to eat, what kind of food is going to be served in that particular place, and how much it will cost. Don't you love those little, if you ever looked at them, $1 sign, $2 sign, $3 sign, and just a little warning, just a little heads up before you take the whole family into some restaurant and drop $175. It'll suggest good places to sleep, things to do, sights to see. In fact, you'll probably carry a good guidebook around with you everywhere you go when you're in that particular place, whatever the venue might be. And the story of God and His people, the story that brings us together here this morning, is all about being in travel mode. Think about the stories in the Bible. Noah signs on for a family cruise, along with a whole lot of critters. Abraham leaves the big city to become a nomad in Canaan. In fact, Abraham never stops traveling. Till the day he died, he was always in a tent on a long 100-and-some-year camping experience. Moses takes his people on a journey through the Sinai desert to the Promised Land. And that journey, the Exodus, is the model for our journey as we follow Jesus through this life to the Father's house. God's Word is our guidebook. And it's a guidebook that always points us in the right direction for the next twist and turn in the path ahead. The Bible doesn't just tell us where the journey ends up. The Bible tells us, if we're willing to take the time to soak in God's Word and find what God wants to say to us, the Bible tells us what we need to know for the next step, for the next decision, the things that are just around the next corner. After all, when you're driving down the interstate, say you're driving from here to New York City, the most important piece of road right now is the one that's right ahead of me. And that's what God does. He narrows things down for us to the details of the moment while never causing us to lose sight of the outcome that He has for us. King David was no stranger to being on the road or to wandering far off the beaten track, for that matter. He spent 10 years in a trackless wilderness, running for his life, never knowing really where he would be the next night, which cave he would need to be in, or which friendly home he might be able to spend the night in. His most famous song, Psalm 23, superbly captures what it means to be in travel mode. Listen to the ways that David reminds us that we are on an Exodus journey ourselves. Psalm 23, the first 4 verses, and just listen to the references to moving around, traveling. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This is a song about being in motion. The very word shepherd meant we're going somewhere today. Shepherds didn't have all of their sheep in a big barn where they threw food in 3 times a day. Now, the whole point of being a shepherd was you took the animals out to where the grass was growing, And when they ate up all the grass in one place, you moved them to another. And when they needed a drink, you moved them somewhere else again. And the shepherd and the sheep are always moving around. The sheep looking for something to eat, the shepherd making sure that they all got where they needed to be. So this is not a psalm when David calls the Lord our shepherd. It's not a psalm about sitting around with all the creature comforts of home. This is not a song about God taking care of our needs as we stick to our old routine. As tempting as it is to say, okay, Lord, I think I've got things settled here. Now just keep the food and the shelter and the love coming and refresh my soul, Lord. This is refreshment that happens while we're traveling. We're on God's journey. It's a song about being away from home, about facing the unknowns and the uncertainties that come when you're in travel mode. And this morning is a morning that reminds us that God is constantly calling us to move forward. Pastors Gus and Carrie have heard God's call. Something, if you know them, you know they pray and they spend time with the Lord. And they carry deep in their heart a vision of what church can be and of their specific set of gifts that they want to bring to a community. I don't know if you know their story or not, but just in their earliest ministry, they were ministering in downtown Minneapolis to street people, basically. People with severe alcohol issues, people living in, people that would basically be living out of doors, even in Minneapolis of all places. And they had a heart for those people. And it doesn't surprise me that God is calling them back into an urban environment where they can be fulfilling that unique passion that God put in their hearts. But the same thing happens, like I said earlier before I began the message to you this morning, for all of us with the changes that come in our lives. I'd like you to just try to think of that area of change, whether it's something you want or something you don't want, as part of a journey that God is taking you on. And part of God bringing you to a new place. And just as it's going to be a big deal for Jenny to go find a church home, the good news is God has a church there. He has about 150 churches there, but you're going to find that one and that set of friends. And people there are going to be blessed, not even knowing that the blessing was coming from, frankly, a town they'll never have known existed unless Jenny tells them, St. Albans, Vermont. But God will transfer some of the blessing. And the same is true for some of you who are coming into this community. And you're in your journey, and you're kind of wondering, well, I wonder if God can do here what he did for us over there where we used to be or where we came from. And the good news is that God is in all those places. Psalm 23 is a testimony to us that we're on a journey and God is our shepherd taking us on that journey. So what can God's travel guide, especially as we look at it in Psalm 23, tell us about the uncertainties and even the sadness as well as the excitement, the neediness as well as the hopefulness about our journey, and particularly where you are right now? Well, the first thing that a guidebook needs to do is assure you that you can find food and shelter. If you go down to Barnes & Noble and pick out a guidebook for a particular destination anywhere, first thing you'll notice, they'll tell you what sites are important, kind of get you excited about the place, and then come pages after pages of restaurants and hotels, or bed and breakfasts, or hostels, whatever it is that you want. Why? Because the first thing we need to do when we're away from home is find a temporary home. I remember my wife telling a story when they were little kids. They lived in California, and they would go to places like Yosemite and so on and camp. And so you have these little kids in the back of the car who had been gotten out of bed early in the morning, stuck in the car, and mom and dad are driving along. They know what's going on. The kids have no clue. So the kids started asking questions. Where are we going to sleep tonight? Oh, don't worry. Where are we going to sleep tonight? Where are we going to sleep tonight? Finally, their dad bought a little trailer, hooked it up to the back bumper, little camper trailer, and every time they asked a question, he said, in that. And they'd look out the window and go, oh, okay, and that was the end of the questions. They just needed something graphic, something physical to know, we're going to have a bed tonight. Well, it's one thing when you're a little kid, but hey, just ask Gus and Carrie what it's like to go to Atlanta and look for a place to live. How are we going to eat? What's going to happen? How's this all going to fit together? It can seem like a Mount Everest. And I know any of us who are facing big changes, maybe if that job is on the line and you're wondering, Okay, now, will we still be living here, or do we have to move somewhere else? Well, David begins by addressing this need for food and shelter. And the first thing he says in the Psalm 23, verses 1 to 3, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. I shall not want. I lack nothing." Does that mean that we have everything we can imagine sitting in a big pile all the time? No, it means we have the shepherd who will always bring us to the place when we need it to find what we need. We don't have to have it all. We don't have to have the bank account to kill all bank accounts. We don't have to have 7 years of rations stored up in the basement. We don't have to be our own provider. The Lord is our shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He restores it. He brings it back. Literally, the term that David uses is he brings it back to what it was supposed to be. And you know how we kind of all get strung out? We all kind of get outside of our skin and we're sort of scattered. He pulls all the pieces back together. So the first thing David's telling us is that on God's Exodus journey, we will never go without. And then he goes on to tell us that God will provide us with food and drink as well as a place to sleep. Just even the most basic things that we need. Whether it be physically the food and physically the drink and physically a place to sleep, or whether it be what those stand for. Just that sense of security, of knowing it's going to be okay if I'm on God's journey. Now, the same is true for us here as it is for those of you who are facing personal change. We need to know as a church that God provided wonderfully for our children and our families through Pastor Gus, and wonderfully for our teens. It's just been tremendous ministry going on there with the youth group. And that raises questions when Gus and Carrie say they're moving on. Well, what happens to our kids? You may be sitting there going, well, what happens to kids' church? Or will there be a youth group? The answer is yes, because the Lord is our shepherd. And he's not going to let any one of the little sheep go without. David takes care of that in his travel guide before he gets to anything else. Because he knows that if we aren't able to trust God for the basics of life, we'll never take the greater risks of going out on a journey with him. And the second thing that David addresses is the issue of having a sense of direction. One of the scariest things about taking a trip to a place you've never been before is the thought of getting lost. I mean, even just the thought of driving out of a strange airport, or driving into a strange town, or getting into a place where perhaps you don't know the language and all the signs are in funny characters. And I think for a lot of us, that would be enough to say, oh, no, I'm not doing that. No wonder guidebooks are filled with all sorts of maps and detailed directions, how to get us to the next direction. Or your smartphone has that app on it, the GPS app, and translates all those funny signs into something you can read so that you can follow the directions, or even have your phone tell you how to get to the place where you're going. In the book of Isaiah, we encounter God's people asking God to help them find their way. They're crying out for direction. They'd become lost, not just as individuals, but as an entire people. They had gotten lost spiritually by getting into all sorts of idolatry. They had been swept up, those that had survived the wars that they had initiated, had been swept up and carted off into exile. They had experienced more change than any of us will ever experience in a lifetime. And now it was time that they were going to come home. And they were asking God to show them the way. Listen to how Isaiah puts it. This is Isaiah 63, verses 11 to 14. Then his people recalled the days of old, the days of Moses and his people. There's your Exodus. Where is he? And here are their questions. Where is he who brought them through the sea with the shepherd of his flock? Where is he who set his Holy Spirit among them, and who sent his glorious arm of power to be at Moses' right hand, who divided the waters before them to gain for himself everlasting renown, and who led them through the depths? Like a horse in open country, they did not stumble. Like cattle that go down to the plain, they were given rest by the Spirit of the Lord. This is how you guided your people to make for yourself a glorious name. Isn't that a beautiful picture? People that were lost, but could remember that somewhere in their nation's past, God had led his people when they were willing to be led. Well, wherever we are right now, we may feel lost, we may feel an emptiness, you may be in a personal sense or as a family struggling with what do we do next? Well, the same God that could bring a people out of slavery or a people out of exile and could just eliminate the oppositions to them, open up the sea and carry them through on dry land, the same God is there for you and me. This is how you guided your people to make for yourself a glorious name. A lot of parallels here with Psalm 23, but one that sticks out to my mind is David saying, you lead me in paths of righteousness for the sake of your name. See, God's reputation is on the line. When we put our trust in him, he takes that seriously. He says, I'm not going to let you down. If you stand with me, if you put your trust in me, and I let you down, then that tells the whole world that I, the God of creation, am not dependable. And I'll never let that happen. Third thing, you got a place to sleep, a place to eat. You've got good directions. It's all fine. But will I be safe when I travel? Will I get myself in trouble? Will I not even know and go down the wrong street? A number of years ago, I had the chance to go down and assist with a missions trip with Teen Mania. Kids were coming and going from Miami. That was their base. Missions trips were coming in from overseas, and kids were staging there and heading out. And everything was happening in two places. The Miami airport, which is just west of the city of Miami, and downtown Miami, where they had basically rented a gigantic hotel. So all the kids that came into the airport had to go to the hotel. All their luggage had to go to the hotel. And vice versa. Any kid that was heading out on a flight, their luggage had to go back. Well, because I was over 30, that made me sort of one of the servants of this deal. This whole place was run by young people, and us older guys were given jobs like driving trucks. So I had a truck. No air conditioning, just a truck with a big box truck. And I would go to the airport. They would fill it up with luggage, and I would drive it back to the hotel. We'd empty it, and we'd put in somebody else's luggage and go back. I made I don't know how many trips to and from the airport on this Sunshine Highway or whatever it's called, just like a big interstate. Now, at that particular time, the city of Miami had been suffering a series of like carjackings and so on that involved the victimization of tourists, many of them from overseas, who accidentally drove into the wrong neighborhood and got themselves in a world of hurt. And so, in response to that, the city of Miami did a very wonderful and clever thing. They put up a series of signs down this major highway that went from the airport to the hotels, back and forth. And on these signs were big, bright, sunny faces, a big sunshine with a big smile, Sunshine Highway, and stick with the Sunshine Highway or something like that. Don't get off the Sunshine Highway, meaning if you do, you may be dead. So all you did was just drive around and look for happy sunshines. And I remember driving along and looking, over the side going, ooh, because, it's sort of like seeing a swamp full of alligators down there. You don't want to go down that neighborhood. I wasn't from around there. I didn't know one street from another. All I knew is I'm looking for the sunny faces and never getting off that highway. And back and forth, nobody had any problem. Safety, it's a big issue. And David tells us that on our Exodus journey, in a much more dangerous environment, really, when you think of all the things that could happen in our lives, even the things that we could choose to do that could derail our journey, that God himself promises us safe passage if we will follow him. Perhaps the most famous verses of the Psalm, verses 4 and 5, go like this. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. You see, we don't travel alone. Jesus has promised to be right there beside us, to comfort, to protect, even to prepare a feast in the middle of a place where it seems like our enemy has the upper hand, where the scary things in life are threatening. I don't know about you, but when I'm facing a lot of change, there'll be some nights when I just lie there and all of a sudden it just becomes overwhelming. I can feel that knot in my stomach and can just think of all the what ifs, and some of the pathways that seem to open up in front of me are so dark I don't even want to think about going down them. That's what it feels like to be on a journey that you may not have even chosen and that is taking you into the unknown. And David said, when that happens, not if that happens, but when that happens, I will fear no evil, not because I'm so brave, because we're all chickens at some point or another, but because he's with me. His rod and his staff, those are the implements that the shepherd carried. They comfort me. When I get hurt, this was first aid for sheep. He poured oil on that bruise or on that tear or that scratch. My cup overflows. Of course, the most important thing about any journey is actually getting there. There's a popular saying these days, it's all about the journey, it's not about the destination. Yeah, try that one out with 3 kids in your car, and you're going to go to a theme park, and instead you just get lost and drive around for 3 days trying to find the theme park, then come home and see if anybody had a good time. The journey's important. Each part of it's important. The destination's important, or else it was a meaningless journey. And there are times in our Exodus journey when we're going to wonder whether we'll actually get there, or whether we actually heard God correctly. Did you really say we're supposed to go this way instead of this way? Or was that just me? Or was I just confused? There are times when the obstacles will seem too great, the road too long, the dream too good to be true. And when that happens, remember what David said about the true God-led Exodus journey. Verse 6, surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God gets us where we need to be. And when we read these words, dwell in the house of the Lord forever, yes, we think about the end of the journey. But there's also a sense in which our lives have little journeys, negotiating this next big patch of change. And the good news is that at the end of this patch of change, we can be dwelling in God's presence and in his house. The journey we pray for Gus and Carrie will bring them to the Father's house in that sense of being right where he wants them. That journey for Jenny and her family, the journey for your college student, Matt Luno's journey through rehabilitation and his family's journey. We want to see that come to that place of blessing. We want to see them resting in God's wonderful presence and knowing that while they might not choose to do that journey again, that they came out where God meant for them to be. Now, David began his song by identifying his travel guide. The Lord is my shepherd. And Jesus told his followers and told you and me that he is the good shepherd. He is God's travel guide, not just a book that we carry around, but that walking, talking, caring, loving person who personally walks us through the journey together. Every day you're going to wonder whether or not you have enough strength or provisions for the journey. And sometimes you're going to feel that cold clutch of fear and not want to go on. Sometimes you're going to be tired and discouraged. Sometimes you're going to feel all alone. And that's when we need the Good Shepherd to lead us and energize us for the journey. He's the travel guide. He's the one who has walked the path that you're walking, that I'm walking. He's the one that didn't just walk around the Holy Land from Galilee to Jerusalem and various other places, but walked even the deepest and darkest and most terrifying parts of what it means to be human. He's the one that walked to his own death, carrying his cross on his shoulder. He's the one that walked out of that tomb in brand new life. So he makes a good guide, in fact, the only guide that I would want to follow for the life that God has called us to have. So really, at this point, all I can say is it's time to gather up your stuff. Whether you plan to be on a journey or not, we're on one. We're on one as a church. And we have friends that are going through big changes. Some of us are going through them ourselves. Time to say, Lord, My stuff's packed. I'm ready for whatever it is you have to do in my life. Let's travel together. I'm going to ask if